What would you do if the one person who truly had your back gave you, in front of everyone, what looked like nothing at all? The boardroom of Pemberton and Associates in downtown Toronto smelled like carpet shampoo and old ambition. Ingrid Halloway, 41, sat at the far end of the table, with her hands folded in her lap and a travel mug of gas station coffee she hadn't touched. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a grey February morning pressed against the glass, the kind of Toronto winter sky that looks like the city wrapped itself in a wet wool blanket and refused to come out. To her left sat her older brother, Gavin. He'd driven down from the annex in a BMW that probably cost more than Ingrid's annual salary. He was already checking his phone, scrolling with one thumb, already somewhere else in his head. To her right was her younger sister, Petra, who had flown in from Vancouver the night before and kept sighing at intervals that suggested she had somewhere much more important to be. They were here for the reading of the estate of Edna Ruth Halloway. Edna had been 84. She had grown up in Timmins, Ontario, the daughter of a Finnish bush pilot and a Cree woman who spoke 3 languages and trusted nobody she hadn't watched work with her hands. Edna had inherited that instinct. In the 1960s and 70s, when the mining sector in northern Ontario was still wide open, she had quietly staked mineral claims, registered land parcels, and built a modest but real portfolio of Shield Country property. Nothing glamorous. No Bay Street press releases. Just a woman in rubber boots who paid attention when no one else was paying attention. And in her final years, when her lungs started failing and her world shrank to a farmhouse outside Timmins and a portable oxygen machine, and 3 meals a day she couldn't always finish, there was only one of her 3 grandchildren who showed up. Ingrid had taken an unpaid leave from her grade 4 classroom in Hamilton. She had driven north in her 8-year-old Civic with 2 suitcases and a box of books, moved into the farmhouse's small spare room, and spent 22 months managing Edna's medications, driving her to appointments in Timmins, sitting with her through the bad nights when the oxygen mask felt like a cage and sleep refused to come. Gavin had sent a card at Christmas. Petra called every 2 or 3 weeks, cheerful and brief, already halfway out of the conversation before it started. Harold Pemberton, Edna's lawyer, a small, careful man in his late 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and the posture of someone who had delivered difficult news many times and learned to hold his face very still, cleared his throat and opened the estate file. "To my grandson, Gavin Scott Halloway," Harold read, his voice even and practiced, "I leave the Halloway farmstead property in South Porcupine, including the house and all surface improvements, to be held outright. Market value assessed at $460,000. Gavin looked up from his phone long enough to nod once, the way you nod when someone confirms your coffee order. "To my granddaughter, Petra Lynn Halloway," Harold continued, "I leave the Halloway rental properties in Timmins proper, including the 3 residential units on Mountjoy Street, along with the liquid savings currently held in the Scotiabank estate account, valued at approximately $280,000. Petra uncrossed and recrossed her ankles. "Both the rental units and the savings? Okay, good. I was worried she'd split the rental income 3 ways. She didn't look at Ingrid when she said it. Ingrid's heart was doing something she didn't have a word for. It wasn't quite hope, not anymore. It was more like the thing that sits just behind hope, quieter and more honest. She'd told herself she wasn't expecting anything. She'd told herself she'd done what she did because as Edna deserved it, because she'd loved her grandmother since childhood, because some things you do because they're right, and not because of what comes after. She'd told herself all of that and she'd mostly believed it. But sitting in that chair in that carpeted room with the February sky outside the window, she realized how much she had quietly, secretly counted on the lake cabin, the old one at the end of the gravel road, where she and Edna used to pick blueberries, where her grandmother had taught her to read a compass, where the loons called every morning, and it felt like the rest of the world didn't exist. Just that, just something small and true. Harold looked down at the file, then up at Ingrid, over the rim of his glasses. "And to my youngest granddaughter, Ingrid May Halloway, I leave the deed and all associated mineral and surface rights of Parcel 7, Lot 14, registered under the township of Garrison, Cochrane District, locally referred to as the Garrison Flat." The room went quiet for 3 seconds. Then Gavin actually laughed, not a polite, suppressed laugh, a real one, short and sharp. "The Garrison Flat," he said. "Harold, is that a joke? That's 200 acres of muskeg and shield rock that floods every spring. The county rejected a rezoning application on it twice. The property taxes are higher than the timber yield." Harold did not answer. He adjusted his glasses. Petra had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, which was more than Gavin managed. "Ingrid, I'm sure she didn't mean it as, maybe there's something we don't know about it." "There's nothing to know," Gavin said, straightening his jacket. "It's a bog, with rocks. Gran picked it up for back taxes in 1978. It's never been worth anything." He stood, pushing his chair back. "Look, Ingrid, if you need help covering the property tax bill until you figure out what to do with it, let me know. I know a developer who buys nuisance parcels sometimes. Might get you something for it." He said it the way people say things when they're already thinking about what they're doing after. Petra followed him out, already texting. The heavy door clicked shut behind them. Ingrid sat alone in the room with her gas station coffee and the view of the Toronto skyline. She thought about the 22 months. She thought about 3 in the morning in Edna's kitchen, waiting for a coughing fit to pass. She thought about all the things she hadn't let herself think about, because she'd been too busy being present to think. She heard Harold's chair shift. Ingrid. She looked up. Harold was reaching into the inner breast pocket of his jacket. He pulled out an envelope, thick cream paper, slightly water-stained at one corner, sealed with a strip of clear tape over the flap, the way old people seal things when they don't trust wax to hold. Ingrid's name was written on the front in Edna's handwriting. Not the shaky scrawl of her last year. Something earlier. Steerdeer, like she'd written it when she still had time to get it right. "Edna gave me very specific instructions," Harold said. He set the envelope on the table and slid it across. "I was to read the will as written. I was to let your brother and sister leave. And then I was to give you this." He paused. "She made me promise I would not tell either of them this letter exists." Ingrid picked up the envelope. She broke the tape. Inside was a single index card, lined the kind from a recipe box, Edna's hand firm and clear. "My Ingrid, if you're reading this, Gavin is probably already planning to sell my farmhouse, and Petra has spent her share twice over in her head. Never mind them. You know the Garrison Flat. You've walked it with me. Remember what I always told you about the shield? It doesn't give up what it holds easily, sweetheart, but once it does, nothing takes it back. Go to the northeast corner of the flat. Follow the hydro cut north until you reach the old Kivenin adit. The lock on the door is new. The combination is the date I staked the first claim. You'll know it. Don't bring anyone you don't trust. And don't sell that land, girl. Not for anything, Gran." Ingrid read it twice, then she sat very still. Edna Halloway had never done anything by accident. It took her 4 days to arrange the drive north. She used the last of her leave paperwork, called a friend to feed her cat, and pointed the Civic up the 400 toward the shield country she hadn't seen since the funeral. The Garrison Flat sat 40 minutes east of Timmins on a township road that the county graded twice a year and forgot about the rest of the time. Ingrid had been here as a child, in rubber boots, following her grandmother through the low blueberry scrub along the property edge. She remembered the sound of it, the way the ground hummed hollow underfoot in places, the way the black spruce grew crooked and small like they were arguing with the wind. She remembered thinking it was the most desolate, beautiful place she'd ever seen. She pulled over at the property gate and sat for a moment with the engine running and the heater going because it was -14 and the sky was the pale, flat white of a northern Ontario February. Then she turned the engine off and got out. She found the hydro cut easily enough. The power line easement ran a straight slash through the bush, the towers orange with rust, the right-of-way a corridor of low shrub and frozen muskeg. She followed it north, her boots punching through the old snow with each step. The cold settled into the gap of her jacket collar and the space between her gloves and her cuffs. She'd looked up what a mining adit was on the drive up, a horizontal tunnel into a rock face used for drainage and access. The Kivinen adit she'd found in a Cochrane District Historical Registry through the public library system was dug in 1924 by a Finnish prospector named Eino Kivinen, who believed he'd found a silver vein. He hadn't. The adit was abandoned by 1927. The entry was noted on old survey maps as a rock face on the north edge of the Garrison Flat, partially obscured by a diabase sill that jutted from the Canadian shield like a grey shoulder blade. She found it after 35 minutes of walking. It was smaller than she'd expected, a low mouth in the rock face, maybe 5 feet tall and 4 feet wide, the original timber framing weathered to the color of old bone. But in front of the rotted wood was something new, a steel door, modern and serious, bolted into the rock with heavy anchors. On the door was a digital keypad, small and black, with a green LED blinking once every few seconds in the cold. Ingrid stood in front of it and breathed. The date I staked the first claim. She did know it. Edna had told her that story so many times she could recite it like a rhyme. September 3rd, 1971. That was the day I put my boots on the flat for the first time and knew what was underneath. Your grandfather thought I was chasing ghosts. I told him ghosts don't show up on assay reports. Ingrid pulled off her right glove. Her fingers were already cold. She pressed the keypad 090371. The green LED held steady. Deep inside the door, something mechanical shifted. A series of bolts withdrawing from their housing, one after another, a sequence she felt more than heard. The door swung outward on hinges that were cold but smooth, well-oiled, maintained. The smell that came out was dry, dust and old paper and something faintly metallic, like a coin held in a closed fist. Not damp, not rotten, preserved. Ingrid turned on her phone flashlight and stepped inside. The original adit extended about 20 meters into the rock before opening into a wider chamber. Kivinen's test excavation, where he'd drilled and blasted looking for his silver. The walls were rough and dark, streaked with iron staining, but the floor had been leveled with poured concrete at some point, and along one wall sat 2 fireproof filing cabinets, olive green, old military surplus. Beside them was a small folding table. On the table, a battery lantern. She clicked it and a warm yellow light filled the chamber. On the table was a large manila envelope marked with her name. And on the wall above the filing cabinets, mounted on a rough wooden frame, was a hand-drawn map of the Garrison Flat. It was covered in notations, survey markers, depth measurements, a grid of sample points marked with small red dots that clustered heavily in the northeast quadrant of the property. Ingrid pulled the old wooden chair from behind the filing cabinet and sat down. She opened the envelope. What she found inside took her an hour and a half to fully understand. Edna had commissioned a private geological survey of the Garrison Flat in 2019. She'd hired a licensed geologist from Sudbury through a numbered company, so the report wouldn't surface in any public registry linked to the Halloway name. The survey results, 43 pages of technical analysis with maps and drill core photographs, confirmed that the northeast quadrant of the property sat above a significant concentration of lithium-bearing spodumene and associated rare earth elements. The deposit was deep, in the Canadian shield, which made it expensive to access. But it was real. The conservative extraction valuation, a 2019 estimate before the electric vehicle battery boom had pushed lithium prices to where they were now, was listed as between $2 and $3.5 billion. The Garrison Flat was not a bog with rocks. It was sitting on one of the most significant lithium deposits in northern Ontario. But the second document in the envelope was the one that knocked the air out of Ingrid's lungs in the dry, cold quiet of the Kivenan Adit. It was a certificate of incorporation for a numbered company called 847392 Ontario Inc., registered in 2006. Attached to it were several schedules and transfer documents. Edna had, quietly and without telling anyone, transferred the mineral rights and subsurface easements for the South Porcupine farmstead, the property Gavin had just inherited, and for all 3 Mountjoy Street rental units, the properties Petra had just inherited, into this numbered company 16 years ago. The surface properties, the houses, the buildings, those belonged to Gavin and Petra. But the ground beneath them, everything from 1 meter below grade to bedrock and beyond, belonged to 807392 Ontario Inc., and the sole director of 1847392 Ontario Inc., named in a notarized amendment dated 18 months ago, was Ingrid May Halloway. Her brother had not inherited an empire. He had inherited the right to live on top of Ingrid's land. She leaned back in the old wooden chair and listened to the silence of the shield. The cold pressed in from the rock walls. The battery lantern hummed very quietly. Somewhere far above her, the February sky was doing what it always did, grey and patient and indifferent. She thought about Edna's hands in the last months, thin, bruised easily from the blood thinners, still, until near the very end, competent. Still reaching for a pen, still asking for the files Harold brought out every few months, still paying attention when paying attention was the hardest thing left to do. She thought about what Edna had told her once, picking berries along the hydro cut on a warm August afternoon when Ingrid was maybe 10 years old. The shield doesn't give up what it holds easily, sweetheart. But once it does, nothing takes it back. She had thought it was about blueberries. It was not about blueberries. She sat in the chamber for a long time. She did not feel triumphant. She felt the full weight of what her grandmother had trusted her with, and she understood, sitting in the cold dark with the lantern buzzing beside her, that what she did next had to be worthy of it. 3 weeks later, she walked into the offices of Pemberton and Associates, carrying a leather portfolio she'd bought for the occasion. She was wearing the one good blazer she owned and her grandmother's silver earrings. Gavin was already in the boardroom when she arrived, standing at the window mid-argument on his phone. He was in the process of arranging a development partnership with a commercial real estate group that wanted to convert the South Porcupine farmstead into a subdivided rural residential project. He'd been moving fast. He'd already had the property appraised, already drafted a letter of intent with a buyer. He hadn't called Ingrid to discuss it. There was no reason, in his understanding of the situation, why he would need to. Petra sat in the corner with a latte she'd brought from somewhere, scrolling with the focused energy of someone who expects this meeting to last 20 minutes. Harold sat at the head of the table with his hands folded and his face very still. Gavin ended his call when Ingrid sat down. He looked at her portfolio, then at her face. "Is there a problem with the estate paperwork?" he asked. "No problem," Ingrid said, "but I need you both to read something." She slid 2 document packages across the table. One to Gavin, one to Petra. The cover page of each showed the corporate registration number of 1847392 Ontario Inc. Petra picked hers up. "What is this?" "It's the company that holds the subsurface rights on your properties," Ingrid said. "And mine. And everything's sitting on the Garrison flat." Gavin stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "Gran transferred the mineral rights and subsoil easements on your properties in 2006, Ingrid said. "Harold drafted the paperwork. She amended the directorship 18 months ago. I've had 2 lawyers review everything in the last 3 weeks. It's clean. It holds." Gavin turned to Harold. "Is this real?" Harold reached for his tea. "It is." The color in Gavin's face went through an interesting sequence. Pink, then white, then something more complicated. He began flipping through the pages with the controlled speed of someone who is frightened but doesn't want to show it. "You could have. She was. You were up there with her. You had access to her files. I found out 3 weeks ago, Ingrid said, same as you. Petra had gone very quiet. She was staring at the documents with an expression Ingrid had never seen on her sister's face before. Something that might have been, for the first time in a long time, genuine uncertainty. The farmstead, Gavin said. He wasn't talking to anyone specific anymore. The development partnership. I've already signed a letter of intent. I know, Ingrid said. The development permit application requires subsurface clearance. You don't have subsurface clearance, and under the terms of the company structure, I control it. She let that settle. I'm not here to take your properties, she said. I want to be clear about that. You keep the surface rights. You keep the buildings. That was Gran's intention, and it's mine. Gavin looked up. Then what do you want? I want the garrison flat developed properly, Ingrid said, with a mining partner who will do it right, pay fair royalties, and treat the land the way Gran would have wanted. She set a third document on the table, a preliminary term sheet from a junior mining company out of Vancouver, one she'd spent the last 3 weeks researching and vetting. I've been in conversation with a group that has a strong environmental record. They've reviewed the survey data. They're serious. She looked at Gavin. I'm also going to need the South Porcupine rezoning application withdrawn. That land is part of the buffer zone the operation will require. I'll compensate you for the fair value of the development opportunity you're losing. She named a number. It was reasonable. It was not enormous. The Mount Joy Street properties aren't affected. Your rental income stays, Petra. I don't need to activate the subsoil easements on those. She paused. As long as the properties are properly maintained. I had an inspector do a walkthrough last week. Unit 3 has a roof that's been deferred at least 2 years. That gets fixed before April. Petra blinked. Okay. And I want Gran's name on something, Ingrid said. When this project goes forward, there's going to be a community benefit fund, standard for responsible extraction operations in Ontario. I want a scholarship attached to it. The Edna Halloway Scholarship. For Timmins kids going into earth sciences or geology. She said it plainly without drama. She'd have liked that. Gavin sat back in his chair. He looked, for perhaps the first time in all the years she'd been watching him be Gavin, genuinely tired. Not angry tired, just tired. The kind of tired that comes when the version of yourself you've been performing runs out of stage. I didn't know, he said, not an apology exactly, but something. I know you didn't, Ingrid said, neither did I. She stood and buttoned her blazer. Gran spent her whole life paying attention to things other people walked right over, she said. She thought the Garrison flat was worth something in 1971 when she staked it. She was right. She thought I was worth something too. Ingrid picked up her portfolio. She was right about that too. She walked to the door, then stopped and looked back. Her brother and sister sat at the long table, the documents in front of them, the Toronto skyline behind the glass, the whole ordinary machinery of the morning carrying on all around them. They looked smaller, somehow. Not defeated, just scaled down to something closer to their actual size. She left you things you can use, Ingrid said quietly. I'd use them. Then she went out into the February cold, where the sun had finally broken through somewhere north of the city, sending a pale gold light across the snow-covered rooftops and the frozen lake and the long flat shield country beyond. She pointed the Civic back toward Hamilton, and she drove, and the farther she got from that boardroom, the lighter she felt, until somewhere around Barrie, she realized she was thinking about September and her grade 4s, and how much she'd missed them, and she thought that might have been the most Edna thing she could possibly feel. So, what would you have done standing in front of that locked door in the cold, with nothing but an index card and a date you'd known since you were 10 years old? Would you have walked away, or would you have punched in the combination? I think you already know the answer. If this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment. Do you think Ingrid was too fair with her siblings? Or did she get it exactly right? And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to claim the drama and turn on your notifications. We'll be here. See you in the next one.